Ampetiwashte Medakiapi. Machiapi Imachiapi Lena Shitangu Lakota Imataha. Chante Washte Nape Chayuzapo. Greetings, relatives. I'm Cheryl Crazy Bowl, President and CEO of the American Indian College Fund. I'm a citizen of the Chitangu Lakota Nation and a lifelong educator and community activist. With COVID-19, with incredible experiences that we're having as a country with the deaths of our African-American relatives, and with the upcoming census and the elections, we feel that as Indigenous peoples, we're at a crossroads once again in the way that we can participate in American society. In this environment of change, we feel like this is a really great opportunity for us to explore how we can be catalysts and activists in creating more equity and more opportunity for Indigenous peoples. With that in mind, the American Indian College Fund is really pleased to have created our Indigenous Activism Speaker Series. This 7-part series will be focused on how we can support tribal college students and people in our communities with taking action and learning more about all of the issues that are occurring in the society that surrounds us and in our own communities. In keeping with the traditions of our people, we're going to open today with a short prayer. I'll offer that prayer today, but I look forward in the future to being joined in that spiritual activity of our people. That is really who we are as tribal people, is we always call upon our ancestors and the Creator to give us support. So please join me in this short prayer. Creator, grandfather, grandmother, we say Wopila for bringing us here in this new circle. We appreciate, Tangashala, that we have the opportunity to use modern tools to support each other and to find ways to bring change and good things to our communities. We want to say a prayer, Tangashala, for all of those people who are in need of your support and in need of resources. We especially pray for those people who are sick, those people who are behind bars, our people who are homeless. We ask for your special prayers for our young people, that you will help them to have clear minds and good hearts, and for our elders to have strength and to live in a good way. And we want to say a special prayer for our tribal colleges, for the leaders of the tribal colleges and all the important ways that they contribute to our communities. And we ask, Tangashala, that you bring peace across Unchimaka, across our grandmother earth. We ask that, Tangashala, that you give insight, give good health and insight to our leaders, because we know that they need that in order to do the work that needs to be done for our communities. Midakuye Oyasi, all my relations. We're really happy today to have one of Indian country's most esteemed leaders joining us. Dr. Twyla Baker is a citizen of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation, and she's the president of Nueta Hidatsa Sahnish College. Twyla has a really amazing background supporting communities as they develop the capacity to do the work that's needed in modern society. And she does that from a place of her own heart being really rooted in her community. We've seen that Twyla is a person who really is an activist for community health and wellness. She's an activist for our participation in what we call STEM, the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics field, through her support of ACES and other kinds of related activities. But she's a strong supporter of tribal sovereignty through both her work and in her local community, but her activism with voter participation and citizen participation throughout North Dakota and regionally, and then nationally through her support of the Native Governance Center. It's really a pleasure for me to introduce Twyla to you. She'll offer some insights and encouragement and support for the work that we're encouraging you to do in your communities. But she'll also I think, be an inspiration. So as you listen to her, just think about the experiences that she's bringing to that. Following her remarks, we're going to offer all of the participants an opportunity to ask questions, and I'll facilitate that. So please take advantage of the chat in order to ask questions, and then we'll use that to learn more from Twyla. So it's my pleasure to invite you to join me in welcoming Twyla to this series. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Dosha Mananakpago. Thank you so much for those kind words. I was off camera, but I was very, very pleased, and it's good to hear that from somebody who I consider to be one of my role models. Watching Cheryl and knowing the depth of understanding and the body of her work in Indian country, and to kind of get those kudos. We all kind of have those aunties and stuff that in our communities, and the ones that we learn from, the ones that teach us how to be good relatives. So, and she definitely is that person. So with that, I'm really excited to be here. This is a groundbreaking event that we're embarking upon, and it's to be a part of the American Indian College Fund family, for one thing, through my association with the tribal colleges, and also kind of a part of the larger Indian or Native community in regards to like nonprofits, the work that we do, the spaces that we occupy, and the people that we know. So I do a lot of different things here. I am embedded in my community, and Cheryl offered up my introduction and who I am as a citizen of the MHA Nation. I just so happen to be lucky enough to be leading our tribal college here on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, where I was born and raised. And we do a lot of different things. I think folks who know tribal colleges are very familiar with the fact that tribal colleges are embedded in their communities, and they do much more than just the higher education arm of work for our communities. We do extension, we do community outreach, we are charged with continuing revitalizing languages and hanging on to our history, basically, and propagating it and recording it and remembering it and engaging our young people in those spaces. And it's such worthy work. It's such amazing work to be able to get paid to do this type of thing. It's a dream job for me, quite honestly. And I hadn't imagined myself in this position when I was young. And it wasn't necessarily something that I came out really as a goal or anything like that. I didn't intend to become a president by any means. And even now, as I get to do this type of work, I don't necessarily consider myself a president who is a community member. I'm more of a community member who happens to be a president. So I get to do a lot of those cool things, and sometimes I kind of quell myself too about some of the work that I'm doing and the spaces that I'm occupying and the people I get to meet. Quite honestly, you know, Cheryl made some reference to some of the work that I've done in the past, and it's gotten me close to so many amazing people, some of them who you will hear from throughout the AICF Indigenous Activism speaker series. Indian country is such a small space. We kind of tend to run into the same people over and over again because we're doing advocacy work and we're doing education. We're doing a lot of different things we wear a lot of different hats, and that's something that's very familiar for tribal colleges and people who work there. So, and it's probably something that's very familiar for folks who live in Indian country as well, and who occupy Indigenous spaces, whether it's urban or rural or out on the reservation. So we just have a tendency to have like this real strong sense of community. And honestly, it's community that I'm here to share with you guys about. I know, I really know that there's a lot of things going on, and y'all are aware of it. I know you are experiencing it right along with me. The simple fact that I'm talking to you right now, my home via Zoom, is an indicator of it, of the changing times that we are within. It's not just the fact of the pandemic that we're dealing with, but also with social change and movements that are impacting all of us. And I really wanted to talk about the spaces that we occupy there, and how Indigenous people can and should show up for that type of work, and how it impacts us directly. As Cheryl referenced, there's of course been the loss of life amongst our relatives. Black people across the country have started to make their voices heard. This is a long-standing issue that we are all familiar with, Indigenous people as well, because we are overrepresented, and we are also heavily impacted by violence and at the hands of law enforcement, and the changes that need to be made there. I think one of the most important takeaways from the Black Lives Matter movement and our space within it is the fact that we as Indigenous people, we as tribal nations, need to kind of sit back and take a look how we can dismantle within our own selves that overlay of colonization that is anti-Blackness within Indigenous communities. So, and we know it's there. It's not necessarily something that we are talk about out loud, but there is plenty to talk about. We have our Black Native relatives. We have folks that live within our communities that are our neighbors, who we need to be better relatives to, and we need to be talking about how that really impacts us, and how we can be looking at that and actively addressing it, not necessarily just by holding up a sign or attending a protest, but also by doing the work within our own boardrooms, our own governance systems, and addressing it through laws, through policy, through the actual sit down and having the conversation, and recognizing it, because we can't really address a problem that we don't recognize in the first place. And I'm hopeful because of the conversation that has started, that really had the gasoline thrown on it with the death of, the murder of George Floyd, and other individuals like Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, other folks whose names we want to say. It makes me, it's heartbreaking, but at the same time, it can become a point of hope for our communities. Just considering respond to it, the way we can use this flashpoint as a means of addressing the problem in the first place, and really starting the conversations with like our congressional delegations, talking about the laws that need to be changed, defunding police, or addressing it in some way, and looking at law enforcement, violence, and really getting in front of it, as opposed to just addressing it via punishment. So there's a lot to unpack there, and there's a long conversation that needs to be happening, not just nationally, but also within our own communities. We have a lot of work to do too. So I think some of the other things that I had wanted to talk about was basically tied to some of the stuff I just talked about in regards to activism to action. folks are very familiar with, and the media kind of splays across the TV screen all the time, the movements or the protests that happen, the building up the signs, and a lot of the sensational stuff that's happening on the streets and in different spaces, monuments coming down and things like that. Those would kind of get the attention, but I do want to talk about actual like the work that goes behind a lot of those types of movements and those types of actions. There is definitely space for that, and there's a lot of taking what you're feeling and translating that into action for people. And I feel that I've learned so much, even in this space of higher education, in regard translating that activism to action, because we spend so much time doing the talking and meeting together and doing the organizing, getting our stories together in order to do things like talk to our congressional delegation, go spend time on Capitol Hill, speaking to them, writing to them, advocating for who we are and on behalf of our people. That's kind of where the rubber hits the road. And I think folks get caught up a little bit with the protesting side of everything, but a lot of the work happens behind the scenes. And it really doesn't take necessarily like a bunch of degreed people or anything like that. You can occupy that space wherever you are happening to learn about all of these types of things, and you can take what you're feeling and translate that into action simply by firing off an email to your congressional delegation, to your senator, to your local or regional representatives. And the way I learned that is by doing. I learned that because North Dakota is a small state. We tend to know each other quite a bit, and honestly, I have had face-to-face conversations with senators, with Congress people, and they are just human beings like you and I. They actually work for us. They listen to their constituency, and sometimes you have to help them to listen by being a little bit more insistent, maybe staying the course and actually communicating with them regularly. And they pay attention. They have staffers. If it's not going directly to them, they have staffers that do a lot of that work, do a lot of that fielding of things for them, and getting the message across to them. So you don't necessarily have to be a PhD or have a master's degree or anything like that. You don't even have to be out of high school in order to be able to talk and advocate on behalf of your people. Just as an example, I think about the DREAM Act, which helped to address some of the issues of students who were immigrants brought here, and they have had to face a lot of the work that was done on behalf of the DREAM Act was actually driven by very young people, by school age people who it impacted directly. And the passage of the DREAM Act, that was driven very grassroots. That was really grassroots. So we don't necessarily have to be occupying spaces of like, we don't have to be elected leaders to be able to make change. We can do that type of work wherever we are. So, and just in that vein, I had wanted to offer up some ideas for you to how you can make those types of things happen. It's really it kind of runs the gamut as to how you can enact change within your own community, and you don't have to leave your community. Right now is probably one of the worst times to have to leave your community in a global pandemic and everything like that. But it can be as simple as advocating for a bill or certain legislation the states have representatives who present bills all the time. And it can be as simple as making a phone call or sending an email and starting that conversation, state representative, and talking about the needs within your community. That's how we got some of the work done that my dear sister Ruth Buffalo got through the state legislature here in North Dakota. The other thing that we could do is, of course, protest and do the movements, the action, and making the big waves and the kind of the splashy stuff. But also, you could do that via social media. You could create a public awareness campaign that includes a lot of social media via video, like what we're doing right now, or through posts, or through what's happening, like say with the R word, the slur, the Washington team. There's in conjunction with what's happening right now, a lot of this point in time is being used kind of as a catalyst for the change of that logo and that name, which is of course a slur in Indian country. So you know, take advantage of the time that we're in and the space that we're occupying right now. Other things that you could do could be raising money, as simple as that. I think about my friends down in Navajo who are experiencing COVID they're being unduly impacted by COVID. And I think about my friends from Protect Native Elders who are actively raising money for elders on Navajo Nation in order to address some of the disparities that are happening there. And that was all just based off of somebody thinking that it was important to do something like that, and that they had to do something, that they had to take action. So the other thing that you could do is to get the press involved, talking to or tweeting at somebody from the press and saying, hey, have you seen this? Have you seen that Navajo's impacted by COVID? We need you to report on this. We need be raising awareness about these types of things, and that Indigenous people are at risk. So those types of things are definitely work that needs to be done. So I think the last thing that I kind of really want to talk about is in regards to taking care of oneself through a time of crisis like this. I think what I do and how I think about it and how I approach it, because this is really difficult for everybody. This is really hard on so many of us. So many of us are dealing with multiple things in our lives. There's the disease, there's the virus, of course, there's the movements that are happening. And then of course we got to live our regular lives. We've got to go to work, or we have the pressure of being frontline workers, or we have our children who now can't go to school and we have to homeschool, those types of things. And I think about my students who have all of those things going on all at once, and they got to take classes. Now they got to do them online. There's a lot of things that are happening all at once. And the way that I address that for myself personally is by thinking about my own legacy and where I come from, and how this isn't necessarily the first time that we've had to deal with something of this magnitude, of this type of threat to our people. And I know it's not necessarily something that I myself went through, but it's definitely something that my ancestors went through. And I draw a lot of strength knowing and understanding that resilience, that ingenuity, that adaptiveness literally flows through my veins. And that's something that I express to my students as well, that we move forward together. We talk to each other, we take care of each other. It's all a function of being the good relative. So when things are getting very, very difficult, I tend to lean on who I am as an Indigenous person and my relatives. I tap into those networks, and I draw a lot of strength from that. And I hope that that's something that folks are able to relate and are able to remember in times of stress. The other thing that we try to remember is that there is no right way to be addressing these issues. There's no measure of what's correct for what we're going through right now. This is unprecedented. I know folks get tired of hearing that word, unprecedented, but we just have to move forward with the future, our young people in mind, with the good of our people in here. And I feel, as a woman of faith, that those things will see us through. And I also maintain the faith that a lot of this change is happening for a reason. Things are changing rapidly, and we kind of needed them to anyway. So that's what I had wanted to share for the time being. And I think, Cheryl, I can definitely take questions, or I can have discussion now.
Thank you very much, Twyla. I think I'm going to have my video turned back on, but I think you can hear me. Thank you for sharing. I really want to, recognize that what you're really talking about is a community-based approach to being engaged. Also, I think all of us can relate to the being a good relative. And what does that mean? So would you talk about, like right now, there's a lot of concerns in our communities about how to take care of each other with the COVID-19, more and more cases in our communities at the same time when people in our community are stressed for resources. So what kind of encouragement or advice would you give to our people about taking good care of themselves in light of the virus and how dangerous it is?
Absolutely. I think what my team and I here have been doing is basically kind of checking in on each other. And a lot of it's not necessarily have to do with work always. It can't always have to do with work. I, as the leader of my institution, have to be concerned with the well-being overall of our team members, and really checking in, not necessarily on how they're getting their tasks done or anything like that, but also asking them, how's it going? How are things going? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you connecting with your family? Are you getting some exercise? Are you walking outside? Are you doing those types of things? Just not necessarily putting pressure on them, but basically kind of offering that up as a check-in, and giving them that space and that latitude to be human. Because when everything else falls away, we are all a people, and we have to be very aware of the fact that we need a lot more than just a good job or a good workspace to be able to function well. The whole point of us having high functioning tribal colleges is to address the whole person. And that to me is being a good relative. And then also within the spaces of leadership, understanding and recognizing that it can't always be about meeting this deadline or doing that type of thing. That's a lot of pressure. And that's kind of almost a imposed pressure because of the system that we work in, that was imposed upon us, you know, and then we've kind of taken that on. And I feel like if we just back up and we step into who we are as Indigenous people and how we recognize those roles historically, a lot of the problems and issues that we're dealing with right now can be addressed. We had the solutions for those things now, so we just have to employ it.
That's good. I think that there's a strong connection between our understanding of who we are and how we practice our traditions and our activism. Because being an activist means that you're striving for everybody to be taken care of. And you're striving for people to have the resources that they need. And I know that for us in education, we kind of see that as a path for our people to have more resources for themselves and their families, because that's so important. Could you talk also about, so let's say I'm a tribal college student, you know, getting ready for the fall, and I keep hearing people talking about the census. And I'm like thinking, what does that have to do with me? I have plenty of other things to do. I don't want to take 10 minutes to get online or to call an 800 number. So why is the census so important for tribal college students and our families?
The census is kind of crucial for tribal colleges, period, because it has a lot to do with funding. It determines our population, our numbers, basically. It kind of tells the federal government how much money can be allocated over here, how many resources does this space need. And the more representation that we have there, the better able we are to address a lot of the disparities that exist in higher education and period, quite honestly, across the board. I mean, it would help us to have a larger chunk allocated to Navajo Nation to address something like COVID. It would help Indian country to be able to address a lot of the disparities within K-12 education. And oh gosh, it just really impacts everything across the board. So it's important for people to be engaging with, filling out their census, reaching out to the folks who are doing the census. If they're not necessarily comfortable doing it online, there's other options for them as well, to help them to just fill it out, just to get to be counted, and that helps all of us as a whole, across the board. It helps me definitely as a tribal college president, because then I'm able to pull more accurate numbers and advocate on behalf of my tribe and Indian country as a whole.
Yeah, I think the same thing about, so one of the nice things we want to remind people about with the census as a form of activism is it's a pretty accessible form of activism, because you can do it online, or you can do it with the 800 number, or you can have somebody help you, because it's not like voting where you fill out your ballot privately. It's something that your niece could help you with, or your cousin who has a computer. And we really encourage people to have a Native person be designated as the head of household, because that allows more Native people to be recognized in that role. But talk a little bit about voting then as an act of, I think of voting, you know, increasingly lately, I've been thinking about what's the relationship between living a life of, you know, joy or good quality and direct action. And I think of, you know, what voting means, what it meant, you know, like to my parents and other relatives, but also, well, you know, what do you think it means today, and why should people care? Why should our students make sure that they're registered to vote and that members of their family are registered?
I think that I think about my dad in particular, who was born in a time when he didn't necessarily have the right to vote. He served in the military, and you know, there was a time when he didn't have a right to vote. Not until the Voters' Rights Act passed, and then he was able to protect our country, but he didn't have a say in how it was run. You know, and showing up at the ballot box is one of the most important acts of sovereignty, for one thing. that we can take on. The other thing, and this kind of ties into the activism side of that question, making sure that other people have the ability to vote and the access to voting places, to a ballot box. That is so crucial for Indian country, as a population that has a tendency to not necessarily engage in federal elections, or even state or local elections. We engage a lot with tribal elections, but we should also be paying attention to what's going on at the federal, state, and local level as well, because all of that impacts us. We are literally the most legislated population in the United States. We have the most laws imposed upon us quite often, and therefore we need to be engaged. We need to be aware. We need to be watching. We need to be informing ourselves on candidates, of their platforms, and talking to each other and helping each other get to the ballot box. And if something like voter suppression happens, then we need to get active. We need to be mobilizing, and that kind of was my was a big introduction to me, as to how we could get active and help out our own people. Was with the voter suppression that happened in North Dakota, and the movements that happened there, and how quickly we were able to mobilize everything and had record turnout in our part of Indian country. So yeah, it's crucial, absolutely.
Yeah, I always like to remind ourselves and others that the money that legislators allocate is our money.
Yeah.
There's not
Yeah.
a printing press somewhere where they're printing money in Congress or the state legislature, or even our tribes. The money that our tribes get through Congress is our money. And so I always remind us of that, because how money is spent then is determined by the people who are elected.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so they decide how much money goes to tribal colleges, or how much money goes to food resources, or how much money goes to things our community depends on, like low income energy assistance.
Right.
Who decides that? The tribe doesn't decide that. Decides how much money they're going to put into that, and who gets to pick who the congressional people are. We do. So
yes, absolutely.
Real important. Our team has been posting in the chat box some resources that you can go to. We posted some resources about Indian Country Today has been doing some articles of people who are biracial, Black and Native, and I think that's a really, really excellent resource. You're seeing more and more information like that being shared that people can access just by searching for it on the internet. We've posted how to contact your Congress persons. There's just 2 switchboards that you can call, and they'll connect you, and you can leave your message. And believe us when we tell you that our congressional representatives, both in the Senate and the House, they pay attention to how many calls they get. And one of the reasons why tribal colleges have been successful is because they're good at mobilizing people calling or sending letters. Right after the last election, and with all the Women's March going on, postcards were being sent. And, so even something as simple as sending a postcard can make a difference. We also shared how to access the census. So, look there and see how to access the census, and then making sure you're registered to vote.
Right.
What advice?
Cheryl, there was one question in the chat box that I had wanted to talk about really quick.
I must have missed that. Was all the other
it was on the chat side, not on the QA.
Okay.
There was a question posed about how do young people make sure that their voices are heard, like at council level, at that level. So and I think that the answer to that question to me has to be addressed to our leadership. So if there are people that are listening or tuned in right now or are going to be watching this later on in the YouTube, my challenge to them as a leader within my community, one of the most powerful things and advocate groups that I plug into regularly, being at the tribal college level, is our young people. And I really feel that our leadership needs to be listening to them. And our young people need to be asking, hey, can you help me? You've got a platform. This is important to me. I need such and such. And I challenge our leaders to be willing to open up their ears to them and to offer those resources to them, giving them the plugins, giving them the platform, because that's where the energy is. And these are our future leaders, and they're the ones that we have to be teaching all of this stuff to. And TCUs are really good at that, because you know you're familiar with the Tribal College Week at with AHEC, and how we kind of give them the training and then we just let them loose on Capitol Hill, and they tell their stories the best. Their stories are so compelling, and it's always so inspirational to see a young person starting to engage and doing that type of work. And really, as leaders, I feel like it's our job to tap into our networks and not be afraid of young people and start pushing them out there, you know. And we don't have time and we don't have the population numbers to wait or sit on it or wait for them to be ready, so to speak. Leadership comes in Indian country, not necessarily when we're ready for it, but when we're willing. When we're willing to step into it. So, and that's how I came up in the ranks, is because somebody pushed me out there. Not me, I might not have been ready, but this person who had that clout, who had that leadership position, believed in me enough to know that I was able to get it done. So that is my challenge to, like, my colleagues, my peers, to our leaders in Indian country: tap into your youth, give them the platform. Make sure they're at the table. Make sure they're being heard at council, at the state and local level. So,
yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. I see that. Thank you for catching Cindy and Felicia's comments. I think that you know, you spoke to what your values and you're being a good relative as being contributing to your leadership style. And you know, Felicia, I just want to say that you just have to persist. Also, you know, I'm an elder now, and sometimes when I hear things that happen with especially college students and what's going on, the College Fund has the Indigenous Higher Education Equity Initiative that we've done a lot of work around, which is really about how do you change the culture and climate of higher education to be more welcoming for our students. I invite you to go to our website and look at that report. There's advice there, and you know, there's many Native people in your university community, I think, who could be supportive. But the things that happen to you today happened to me in the 70s. And so I just think we just have to keep persisting. Our people deserve that. Generations like you that come after people like me deserve us to have persisted. And to just keep pushing. And, you know, people do come along. It's very different now. There are as you might be surprised to realize that there are way more people who advocate for a safe and a healthy environment for Native students in real ways and actually taking actions, much more so than they did like 20 or 30 years ago. So I think persisting is really, really super important. I'm going to ask Twyla to just make a few more comments as we bring to a close our first Indigenous activism webinar. I really appreciate all of you who joined the call, and let Twyla make a few remarks, and then I'll close with a couple of remarks about how you can learn more.
I think you kind of captured it really well, Cheryl, when you said persist, to simply persist. We are this continent's oldest inhabitants, and our blood flows through this land, basically. And I feel that it's not just our privilege or our job or anything like that to do this type of work. It's also our responsibility. And this is just how it's a continuation in the modern context, is how we have always been as a people. And it might show up in a different way. We're not necessarily, raising earth lodges or anything like that, although someday maybe I will do something like that. But it's invigorating, it's challenging, it will break your heart, but it will also lift you up to the highest heights, this type of work, especially when you're doing it on behalf of your own people, of your elders, on behalf of the young people, on behalf of your children and future generations. So it's a blessing and it's honor, it's a calling to be able to do this type of work. If you're doing it with somebody like Cheryl Praisable, who's kind of a rock star in her own space, and all of the other people that I get to work with within TCUs and across Indian country. I think that's what I want to share.
Thank you. I can remember when I was in college, a group of us protesting and having a sit-in outside of the financial aid office because we didn't like the way they distributed our BIA scholarship funds. So, you just kind of have to take the action that makes the difference, right?
And absolutely.
Really be thoughtful and get out there with it. And I guess the last comment that I want to make, and then I'll direct you to some college fund resources, is it takes using your values, your generosity. Sometimes it's really hard to be generous, but I always tell people that I'm working with and mentors, if you can afford to be generous. Make a generous decision and be generous hearted, because the recipients of your knowledge and insight, they're struggling also. They're also trying to figure that out. And then it takes courage, because it is when you persist, that takes a lot of courage, because you are calling out behaviors and I don't mean calling out in a mean way, but I mean, you're saying Indigenous people aren't being heard. Where's their voice? How are you including us? What's the opportunity for systemic change? How can we have, you mentioned in the beginning, legislation, policies, practices, how can we change those things? So just want to encourage people to be courageous as well. So thank you so much, Twyla, for joining us and for offering of yourself for all of us to learn from, and for all of our participants to learn from. You can go to the College Fund website. You'll find lots of resources there, but if you go to our advocacy page, you'll be able to access this video after we upload it. There'll be kind of a link to that, and then you'll be able to see our upcoming speakers and join us for those events as well. So Wopila, thank you to everyone for joining us. I'm very grateful and appreciate all that everyone is doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thanks to my team. They did a good job.
Yes.
With a flash of Carrie there for a moment when she was doing video. And then Dina Horfadel, who's our public education person, a great resource. And then Alex Humayamtawa, who is one of our staff person who helps us make things like this happen. So thank you, everybody.